Welcome to the Midnight Chronicler. I am the Chronicler, and today, I am taking you on a journey, not of heroics, but of logistics. If you are new to this department, I suggest you review my previous reports to understand the standard of boredom required here. Now, settle into your curated 21st century comfort. We have an 18,000-word audit of the night to complete. Let us begin, as all proper administrative audits must, with the outermost layer of our subject. Not the man. No, the man is an unvetted report, a series of biological processes we will catalogue in due time, but rather the fabric infrastructure that encases him. Brother Aldrich, a monk of unremarkable administrative standing within the Benedictine complex of St. Ealwald's, stands in the chapel corridor at precisely the 3rd hour past compline. But before we can assess his standing, his purpose, or his state of spiritual preparedness, we must conduct a thorough sensory audit of his wool habit. The habit itself represents a logistical disaster of medieval textile production, and I use the term disaster not as hyperbole but as clinical assessment. This garment, woven from the fleece of sheep maintained in the abbey's outer pastures, carries within its fibers the accumulated evidence of pre-industrial wool processing. We must understand this evidence before we can proceed. The sheep from which this wool derives were shorn approximately 4 months prior to our current observation point, during the late spring shearing. The shearing itself is a separate administrative burden we need not audit tonight, but its consequences manifest directly in the fabric now pressed against Brother Aldrich's skin. Each individual fiber of wool, and we must consider that this habit contains approximately 847,000 individual fibers, retains a coating of lanolin. Lanolin is the waxy secretion produced by sebaceous glands in sheepskin. Its purpose, from the sheep's administrative perspective, is waterproofing and fiber protection. From our administrative perspective, it represents an unresolved clerical error in the textile processing chain. The lanolin content in unwashed wool ranges between 12 and 25% by weight. In Brother Aldrich's habit, we estimate approximately 18% lanolin retention, which translates to roughly 340 grams of sheep grease distributed throughout the garment's structure. This is not a metaphor. This is a literal deposit of animal secretion that Brother Aldrich wears against his skin for 16 to 18 hours per day. Now we must transition from abstract measurement to phenomenological reality. What does it mean, in tactile terms, to wear 340 grams of sheep grease? The first stage of this sensory audit concerns texture at the point of contact. Where the wool touches Brother Aldrich's skin, the lanolin creates what can only be described as a persistently waxy interface. It is not wet, which would suggest water content. It is not dry, which would suggest complete lanolin removal. It exists in an intermediate state of dampish waxiness. Consider the collar region, where the habit contacts the base of Brother Aldrich's neck. Here, the fibers have been compressed by months of wear, by the repetitive motion of his head turning during the 8 daily offices, and by the pressure of sleep. The lanolin in this region has been worked into the fibers through mechanical action and body heat, creating a zone of particular waxiness. When Brother Aldrich turns his head, the collar drags across his skin with a sensation that is neither friction nor glide but something in between. This intermediate sensation requires further analysis. The lanolin reduces pure friction, but it does not eliminate tactile feedback entirely. Instead, it creates a muted drag, a sensation of fabric moving across skin through a thin medium of grease. Brother Aldrich no longer consciously registers this sensation, but that does not exempt us from cataloguing it. His nervous system still processes the input: wool fiber, lanolin coating, skin surface, micro-movements of fabric, and heat exchange at the interface. Lanolin, being a complex mixture of esters and alcohols, does not conduct heat with the efficiency of water or the insulation capacity of air. It occupies a middle ground, allowing some thermal transfer while providing minimal insulation enhancement. The practical consequence is that Brother Aldrich's body heat slowly warms the lanolin-saturated wool throughout the evening. By the time he reaches the 3rd hour past compline, his habit has achieved what we might term tepid equilibrium, not warm enough to provide comfort, not cool enough to cause shivering, but existing in that perfectly mediocre temperature range that the body neither fully accepts nor fully rejects. We cannot complete this textile audit without addressing the olfactory dimension of lanolin persistence. Accuracy demands thoroughness. Lanolin, when fresh, possesses a mild, vaguely sweet odor that some sources describe as characteristic or slightly animal. The reality Brother Aldrich inhabits is considerably less neutral. His habit has accumulated 4 months of lanolin oxidation. Oxidized lanolin develops notes. A base layer of old sheep, overlaid with hints of rancidity as the ester bonds slowly hydrolyze, with occasional grace notes of whatever organic matter the sheep encountered before shearing, grass pollen, soil particles, and the omnipresent dust of medieval agricultural life. This is not a pleasant bouquet. What matters is the persistence of this odor. The smell does not announce itself aggressively. Brother Aldrich, his olfactory system long since habituated to this particular combination of scents, notices nothing. But the smell exists in the intimate olfactory zone, the space within approximately 18 inches of his body. In the chapel corridor, this zone travels with Brother Aldrich like an invisible administrative marker. Other monks, passing him in the corridor, would detect this signature at an unconscious level. The smell is universal enough in this setting that it achieves a kind of olfactory neutrality through sheer ubiquity. Having established the lanolin logistics, we must now audit the physical structure of the wool fabric itself. The wool in Brother Aldrich's habit was woven on a vertical warp-weighted loom. The weave pattern is plain weave or tabby weave, the most basic over-under interlacing of warp and weft threads. This creates a fabric with approximately 16 threads per inch in the warp direction and 14 threads per inch in the weft direction, a slight imbalance that introduces a subtle directional texture. When Brother Aldrich moves, this directional texture creates variable friction patterns. The fabric does not respond uniformly to mechanical stress but rather shows preference for stretching along the weft direction where thread density is lower. This means that as he walks, the habit shifts across his shoulders with a slight bias toward horizontal movement. His body has learned this bias over 17 years, making micro-adjustments in posture to accommodate the fabric's preferences. The wool fibers exhibit the characteristic scaled surface of keratin protein structures. These scales, microscopic projections along each fiber's length, interact with adjacent fibers to create the wool's essential property. It clings to itself. But these same scales also create microzones of friction and catch points where lanolin accumulates preferentially. In areas of high wear, the scales have been partially worn down by abrasion, creating smoother zones where lanolin sits on the surface rather than penetrating between fibers. These zones feel slicker, more waxy, less like wool and more like some intermediate substance. We must also audit the simple physical burden of the habit's mass. When dry, the garment weighs approximately 1.4 kilograms. But the habit is never truly dry. The lanolin content, the ambient humidity of late autumn, and the absorption of Brother Aldrich's own perspiration have increased the garment's mass to approximately 1.8 kilograms. This additional 400 grams represents a distributed load across Brother Aldrich's shoulders and upper torso. The habit concentrates this weight at the shoulder line where the fabric drapes from his frame. His trapezius muscles have adapted over 17 years to carry this load continuously. He does not notice the weight. But that does not mean the weight is absent or consequence-free. His spine maintains a posture fractionally different than it would without the habit. His gait compensates with micro-adjustments, and his breathing pattern accommodates the restriction of heavy fabric against his ribs. These are invisible adjustments happening below the threshold of consciousness. We must now conduct an audit of the internal surface of the habit, the side that contacts Brother Aldrich's skin directly. The interior face of the wool has been worked by contact, compressed by the pressure of body against fabric, saturated with perspiration, and colonized by microscopic organisms. This interior face has developed, over months of continuous wear, a character distinct from the exterior surface. Where Brother Aldrich's shoulder blades press against the fabric during sleep, the wool has been flattened. This compressed zone feels smoother, more like a coherent surface than a collection of fibers. The lanolin here has been worked deep into the fiber structure, creating a nearly continuous waxy layer. Along his lower back, the fabric has developed a series of semi-permanent creases. These creases represent structural failures in the wool's elastic integrity. The creases create pressure points when Brother Aldrich moves, zones where fabric edges dig slightly into his flesh. We have established that the garment is an entire ecosystem of tactile, olfactory, and structural phenomena. It weighs 1.8 kilograms. It contains approximately 340 grams of lanolin. It smells of oxidized sheep grease. It creates a muted drag across skin. It has developed distinct interior and exterior characters through months of wear. This is merely the clothing. We have audited only the outermost layer of our subject, and already we have consumed over 2,500 words. If you find yourself growing drowsy, that is not a failure of attention but evidence that the administrative process is functioning as intended. Medieval reality, when examined at proper documentary resolution, reveals itself to be composed almost entirely of tedious logistics and repetitive phenomena. There is comfort in this revelation. There is sleep in this level of detail. But we have barely begun. 17,500 words remain in tonight's audit. Shall we proceed where we will examine the undertunic and the logistics of linen? Or would you prefer to continue sleeping through the magnificently boring reality of medieval textile infrastructure? The choice, dear auditor, is yours. But the documentation continues regardless. We now proceed to the second textile layer. Beneath the wool habit lies the linen undertunic. This garment represents an entirely distinct category of textile failure. The undertunic began its existence as flax plants harvested during the late summer. What followed was a sequence of processing steps that transformed plant stem into textile fiber. We must understand what these processes did to the fundamental architecture of the flax fiber, because those structural modifications now manifest as tactile consequences against Brother Aldrich's skin. Flax fiber, at the cellular level, consists primarily of cellulose. Where wool fibers possess scales and elasticity, flax fibers are essentially woody plant cells, hollow tubes of cellulose that possess rigidity rather than resilience. Flax fibers do not bend gracefully. They resist deformation. When forced to curve, they accept it as a series of micro-failures where the cellulose structure has been compromised. Brother Aldrich's undertunic contains approximately 3.2 million individual flax fibers. The smoothness of linen derives from the fundamental stiffness of its component fibers. When Brother Aldrich acquired this undertunic, the fabric possessed a degree of crispness characteristic of fresh linen. The fibers held themselves apart, creating a fabric that rustled when moved. 8 months of wear and 4 cycles of washing have transformed this initial character. The washing process, using water heated in copper cauldrons and mixed with lye derived from wood ash, attacks the linen fibers with alkaline aggression. Lye performs chemical modification of the fiber structure itself, breaking down the lignin and pectin compounds that bind cellulose chains together. Each washing cycle breaks down the flax fibers incrementally. The lignin and pectin are leached away or dissolved, causing individual fibers to separate and fray at their ends. The result, after 4 washing cycles in lye solution, is a fabric that has been rendered simultaneously softer and more structurally compromised. The linen undertunic is softer than it was when new in the sense that it drapes more readily over Brother Aldrich's body contours. But it has not become soft in any absolute sense. The fundamental rigidity of cellulose remains. What has changed is that the fibers have been administratively crushed. These washed fibers have collapsed along their length, the tube walls compressed together like a drinking straw that has been pinched flat. This collapsed structure eliminates the small air spaces within each fiber, reducing the fabric's ability to insulate or cushion. The result is a textile that lies closer to the skin, that conforms more readily to body shape, but that provides less thermal buffer and less mechanical protection than fresh linen. The tactile consequence manifests in several ways. First, there is the overall stiffness of the fabric sheet, which retains a certain bawdy quality. It creases with geometric precision, creating sharp edges. Second, there is the surface texture, which has become more irregular as individual fibers fray, creating a slightly fuzzy topography. Third, there is the weight distribution, as the collapsed fiber structure has increased the fabric's density. Brother Aldrich's undertunic weighs approximately 380 grams. The weight is distributed as a uniform load that his nervous system processes as pressure, a persistent tactile signal across his entire torso. The fibers present as small rigid cylinders pressed flat, creating line contacts rather than point contacts. Each thread in the weave creates a minute ridge against his skin, producing a texture that his mechanoreceptors process as fabric presence, linen type, currently acceptable. The texture is not pleasant, exactly, but it is familiar. We must now audit the atmospheric conditions existing in the gap between Brother Aldrich's skin and his linen undertunic, and in the subsequent gap between the linen and the wool habit. These internal microclimate zones function as thermal and hydrological buffers. The human body generates heat continuously through cellular respiration. Brother Aldrich's resting metabolic rate generates roughly 75 watts of thermal power. This heat must be dissipated to prevent core temperature elevation. The body manages this dissipation through several mechanisms, including evaporative heat loss through perspiration. This final mechanism creates the primary administrative burden in the internal microclimate zones. Brother Aldrich's skin is dotted with roughly 2 million sweat glands. At this moment, his sweat glands are not operating at high capacity. But the glands continue their baseline production as part of the body's thermal regulation administrative overhead. The rate of this baseline secretion is approximately 15 milliliters per hour across his entire body surface. The glands on his torso produce perhaps 18 to 20 milliliters per hour combined. This moisture must negotiate the linen undertunic. Linen is hydrophilic. When sweat contacts the inner surface of the undertunic, the water is absorbed into the fiber structure through capillary action. This absorption occurs over several seconds, during which liquid water sits on the skin surface. Let us audit a single drop of sweat as it moves through this system. At a point on Brother Aldrich's spine, an eccrine sweat gland completes its secretory cycle. The gland has been accumulating sweat in its storage reservoir for approximately 4 minutes. The reservoir has now reached capacity, containing approximately 0.4 microliters of fluid. The pressure of this accumulated fluid overcomes surface tension at the gland's duct opening, and the sweat is expressed onto the skin surface. There is no sensation that crosses the threshold of Brother Aldrich's conscious awareness. His mechanoreceptors and thermoreceptors are not sensitive enough to register it. The drop sits on his skin, forming a minute dome. The drop begins to spread, driven by gravity and the wicking action of skin itself. Over the next 12 seconds, the drop elongates, transforming into a small rivulet following the vertical axis of Brother Aldrich's spine. It moves downward at a rate determined by the balance between gravitational pull and surface resistance. Each feature of Brother Aldrich's back deflects the drop's path slightly. The drop is cooling as it travels, losing thermal energy to evaporation. Evaporative cooling is the body's most efficient heat loss mechanism, but in the trapped microclimate, the air is already somewhat saturated with moisture, reducing the efficiency of this process. The relative humidity in the microclimate zone is approximately 85%. The drop continues its descent, losing perhaps 10% of its mass during its 12-second journey. The drop reaches a point on Brother Aldrich's lower back where the linen undertunic is in direct contact with his skin. The linen fibers immediately begin absorbing the water. This absorption takes approximately 8 seconds, during which the water penetrates through the thickness of the undertunic and emerges on the outer surface where it contacts the inner surface of the wall habit. The result is a complex moisture gradient: skin, damp; linen inner surface, wet; linen interior, moist; linen outer surface, damp; wool inner surface, damp through lanolin layer; and wool interior, dry to slightly damp. This gradient represents an ongoing negotiation between moisture production, transport, and evaporation. Brother Aldrich does not feel the individual sweat drops or register the moisture gradient. He experiences only a general sense of damp warmth in the torso region. We must now direct our administrative attention to the undertunic seams. Specifically, the left side seam which runs from Brother Aldrich's armpit to the hem. This seam was constructed using a simple flat felled technique with hemp thread. Hemp thread is coarser, stiffer, and more durable than linen thread. It was selected for strength and longevity, but durability comes at a tactile cost. The hemp thread creates a raised ridge. The seam creates a zone of triple fabric thickness. This ridge creates a line of concentrated pressure against Brother Aldrich's ribs. Currently, the seam rests over the 9th rib, and the pressure concentration is noticeable at the neurological level. The hemp thread has been hardened by lye exposure, creating a thread that feels like thin cord with small knots of rigidity. Each stitch creates a puncture point in the linen weave. These punctures create over 400 individual points where thread penetrates fabric. Each penetration point creates a minute raised bump on the seam's inner surface. Collectively, they create a texture of irregular nodularity along the seam line. Hemp conducts heat slightly better than linen, creating a thin line of enhanced thermal contact. This represents a microscopic thermal gradient that Brother Aldrich's thermoreceptors process. The seam exerts more pressure per unit area than the surrounding flat fabric. This pressure crosses the threshold for persistent tactile awareness at the subconscious level. His nervous system continuously monitors this seam pressure. This monitoring consumes a small amount of neural processing capacity, an administrative overhead Brother Aldrich will never be aware of. The seam also creates a barrier to moisture transport. Where sweat encounters the triple thickness fabric, absorption is slower, creating a zone of slightly elevated skin moisture along the seam line. This moisture remains trapped against his skin for extended periods, creating a thin line of persistent dampness. The monk remains in the chapel corridor. We have audited only his wool habit and his linen undertunic. We have consumed approximately 6,000 words, leaving 12,000 words remaining in tonight's report. The tedium, I trust, is beginning to achieve its therapeutic effect. We now expand our administrative purview beyond Brother Aldrich's corporeal textile infrastructure to examine the physical environment. We begin with the stone beneath his feet. Brother Aldrich's right sandal currently rests upon a limestone flagstone measuring 73 centimeters in length, 51 in width, and 12 in depth. This stone, designated as block reference 7J42, began its existence approximately 165 million years ago during the Middle Jurassic period. At that time, the region was submerged beneath a shallow tropical sea hosting vast populations of calcifying organisms whose remains accumulated and compressed over geological time into limestone. Block 7J42 spent approximately 165 million years underground until the spring of 1312, when a quarrying crew opened a new extraction site. Block 7J42 was separated from the parent stone through plug and feather extraction. This process introduced the first layer of human-generated modification to the stone's surface. Circular depressions from drill holes left evidence of the extraction methodology. The block was transported to the abbey via ox cart. During transport, the block experienced vibrations and impacts that created microscopic stress fractures and grain boundary separations. A mason named William of Grantham performed the finishing work with iron chisels and wooden mallets. His chisel work left subtle parallel striations across the stone face, creating a slightly textured surface intended to provide traction. The block was installed in the corridor floor in August of 1312. Since then, Block 7J42 has been subjected to continuous wear. Thousands of feet have traversed its surface, each contributing microscopic abrasion to the stone's crystalline structure. The stone has also weathered chemically as water has penetrated its surface, slowly dissolving calcium carbonate and enlarging natural pores. The result is a subtly modified landscape of microscopic irregularities. At the scale of direct observation, Block 7J42 appears as a uniform gray surface. Examined at higher magnification, the stone surface reveals itself to be a complex three-dimensional terrain. The surface is pockmarked with pores ranging from 10 to 500 micrometers. Between the pores, the surface consists of interlocking calcite crystals. The overall topography averages approximately 15 micrometers across the surveyed area. The stone surface is a mountainous landscape of crystalline peaks and porous valleys. This microscopic topography becomes critically important when we consider thermal exchange. The stone maintains a temperature of approximately 4 degrees Celsius. This temperature represents an equilibrium between infiltrating winter cold and minimal heat input. Brother Aldrich's foot maintains a temperature of approximately 27 degrees Celsius. When his sandal contacts the stone, thermal energy begins to flow from the warmer sandal to the cooler stone. The stone is conducting a thermal audit of Brother Aldrich's foot, continuously extracting thermal energy and conducting it away into the building's infrastructure. The efficiency of this extraction depends on the contact area. The leather sandal sole can deform to follow surface irregularities, but the leather cannot fully conform to the microscopic irregularities. The pores and crystal facets remain as air gaps. Air, being significantly less thermally conductive than leather or stone, creates zones of thermal insulation at these microscopic contact gaps. Heat transfer occurs primarily at the points of actual solid-solid contact between leather and stone. These contact points become thermal bridges, pathways of efficient heat extraction. At each pore location, the trapped air acts as a microscopic thermal insulator. The result is a spatially heterogeneous pattern of cooling across Brother Aldrich's foot sole. His nervous system does not resolve this pattern consciously. What he experiences is a general sense of cold surface underfoot. Block 7J42 is performing its administrative function, extracting heat and maintaining coolness. Cold, properly understood, is an absence of thermal energy. The chapel corridor represents a zone of successful cold occupation. The exterior November air temperature is approximately 2 degrees Celsius. Against this reservoir, the corridor's minimal heat sources prove wholly inadequate. The corridor has surrendered to cold, achieving a temperature of approximately 5 to 6 degrees Celsius. The corridor is now functionally an extension of the exterior cold. The cold enters the corridor through 3 primary pathways: doorways with gaps between door and frame, conduction through stone walls, and radiation from stone surfaces and timber ceiling beams. The combined effect is that the corridor loses approximately 5 to 6 watts continuously to the exterior cold. We must now audit how this cold propagates through material layers. First, the stone contacts the leather sole of Brother Aldrich's sandal. When the sandal first made contact, heat began flowing into the cooler stone. Over the first 60 seconds, the leather's temperature dropped by approximately 8 degrees. After 17 minutes, the leather sole has achieved a quasi-steady state temperature of approximately 9 degrees Celsius, acting as a thermal bridge rather than a defense. Above the leather lies Brother Aldrich's wool sock. This sock creates a layer of trapped air spaces which serve as an excellent insulator when immobilized. The wool sock maintains a temperature of approximately 22 degrees Celsius. This thin layer of trapped air is Brother Aldrich's primary thermal defense. But heat still crosses the air gap through conduction, convection, and radiation. The combined effect allows approximately 3 watts of heat to flow from the sock to the leather. Above the wool sock, Brother Aldrich's foot skin maintains a temperature of approximately 27 degrees Celsius. Heat flows from the skin into the wool sock continuously. Beneath the skin lies adipose tissue, muscle, tendon, and bone. The bone represents the deepest layer affected by the cold invasion. Brother Aldrich's calcaneus has cooled to approximately 32 degrees Celsius, 5 degrees below normal core temperature. This thermal extraction triggers systemic defensive responses. His hypothalamus detects the foot cooling and initiates compensatory measures like peripheral vasodilation to increase warm blood flow. This thermal burden adds perhaps 5 to 10 watts to Brother Aldrich's resting metabolic rate. Over extended periods, his body compensates by slightly elevating overall metabolic rate, manifesting as subtle physiological changes like increased heart rate. These adjustments are real, measurable consequences of the stone's thermal audit. We must now audit the corridor's acoustic void. The corridor represents a logistical vacuum, a space depleted of sound to near zero levels. In a typical human environment, sound is continuous and layered, creating an ambient noise floor. But at this hour in this corridor, none of the normal sound sources operate. The monks are sleeping or engaged in silent devotions. No doors are opening. The exterior wind produces minimal sound. The ambient noise floor has dropped to approximately 20 decibels SPL. At this noise floor, sounds that would be masked in normal conditions become dramatically prominent. Every sound registers as an event. The corridor's physical construction determines how sounds propagate and decay. The walls and floor are limestone, and the ceiling is oak beams supporting limestone roof vaulting, all hard, sound-reflective surfaces. Limestone possesses low sound absorption coefficients. Perhaps 95% of acoustic energy reflects back into the space rather than being absorbed. This creates a highly reverberant environment. The reverberation time is approximately 2.8 seconds for mid-frequency sounds. A single sound event will persist as audible reverberation for nearly 3 seconds, creating a sonic afterimage. Brother Aldrich shifts his weight from his right to his left foot. This movement generates multiple sound sources. First, wool-on-wool friction as the fabric covering his thighs rub together. The wool fibers catch against each other as the layers slide, generating minute acoustic pulses. They create a continuous frequency spectrum that the human ear perceives as a soft rustling sound at approximately 35 decibels. Second, leather-on-stone contact as the left sandal sole presses more firmly against the floor. This generates a brief scraping sound at approximately 38 decibels. Third, structural creaking as Brother Aldrich's knee and hip joints load differently. These clicks and subtle grinding noises emerge at approximately 25 to 30 decibels. These 3 sources occur nearly simultaneously, creating a composite acoustic event that represents a loud report against the background silence. The sound propagates through the corridor, creating a complex pattern of reflections. Even after Brother Aldrich stands still again, the sound continues to decay, finally falling below his hearing threshold after approximately 2.5 seconds. Then the void reasserts itself, and silence resumes its administrative control. We have audited the limestone floor, tracking cold as a structural invader, and analyzed the acoustic void. Brother Aldrich remains standing in the corridor. We are precisely at the halfway point. The therapeutic tedium continues to accumulate. We now shift our focus to Brother Aldrich's internal metabolic infrastructure. His body conducts a vast parallel operation of biochemical processing. Brother Aldrich's body generates approximately 75 watts of thermal power, an unavoidable byproduct of ATP synthesis. His body contains approximately 37 trillion cells, each conducting ATP synthesis continuously. At his current metabolic rate, his cells collectively synthesize approximately 68 kilograms of ATP per day, more than his entire body weight. Each ATP molecule is used and regenerated approximately 500 to 700 times per day. The actual ATP present in his body at any given moment is only about 250 grams. The synthesis begins with glucose molecules undergoing glycolysis in the cytoplasm, a 10-step enzymatic pathway. This is a cumbersome bureaucratic procedure where each enzyme must complete its function before the substrate can move to the next station. Glycolysis generates a net profit of only 2 ATP and 2 NADH molecules per glucose, an extraordinarily poor return on investment. The pyruvate molecules generated then enter the mitochondria, cramped biochemical factories conducting repetitive processing. Each pyruvate combines with coenzyme A to form acetyl-CoA, which enters the citric acid cycle. This cycle is a bureaucratic masterpiece of repetitive molecular shuffling. 8 enzymes process acetyl-CoA, releasing carbon dioxide and generating NADH, FADH2, and ATP. Each enzyme operates at a fixed maximum rate. NADH and FADH2 must be processed through the electron transport chain embedded in the inner mitochondrial membrane. Electrons cascade through oxidation-reduction reactions, and the released energy is used to pump hydrogen ions, protons, from the mitochondrial matrix into the intermembrane space, creating a proton gradient. The protons want to flow back into the matrix but must pass through ATP synthase, a molecular machine that is a literal example of bureaucratic machinery. ATP synthase consists of 2 main components, F0 and F1, connected by a central rotor shaft. As protons flow through the F0 channel, they cause the rotor shaft to revolve at approximately 100 to 150 rotations per second. This mechanical rotation drives conformational changes in the F1 catalytic sites, producing 3 ATP molecules per rotation. The process is mechanical, repetitive, and obligatory. Brother Aldrich's body contains approximately 100 quintillion individual molecular machines. The collective output is approximately 10 to the power of 23 ATP molecules per day, a testament to the bureaucratic magnitude of maintaining a living human body. Approximately 38 to 40% of the chemical energy in glucose is captured in ATP, while the remaining 60 to 62% is released as waste heat. This heat must be dissipated to avoid overheating. Organs with the highest metabolic rates, the liver, brain, heart, and kidneys, generate disproportionate thermal output. Brother Aldrich's brain generates approximately 13 watts, despite being only 2% of his body mass. Heat is transported to the body surface via blood circulation. His heart pumps approximately 5 liters of blood per minute at rest. At this moment in the cold corridor, heat dissipation is too efficient. His thermoregulatory system responds by slightly increasing metabolic rate. This compensation occurs automatically through mechanisms like increased muscle tone and non-shivering thermogenesis. This administrative burden adds perhaps 5 to 8 watts to his baseline metabolic rate. Every additional watt requires more substrate processing. The biochemical bureaucracy scales up its operations. A significant administrative failure is occurring. Brother Aldrich is awake at 3:28 a.m. This represents a fundamental violation of circadian protocols. The circadian system is a distributed network of molecular clocks coordinated by the master clock in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN. SCN neurons maintain their rhythmic activity through a 24-hour transcription-translation feedback loop involving clock genes. Under normal conditions, light information from specialized retinal ganglion cells synchronizes this clock. But Brother Aldrich has remained awake in darkness since midnight. His SCN maintains its nighttime operational mode while his cortex maintains wakefulness, creating a profound administrative conflict. The SCN promotes melatonin secretion, and at 3:28 a.m. his pineal gland is producing melatonin at near maximum capacity. Melatonin promotes sleep-appropriate physiology, including reduced neural activity and decreased body temperature. Brother Aldrich's voluntary systems are fighting against this signal, an exhausting administrative battle. This fatigue manifests in his eyelids. The levator palpebrae superioris muscle must maintain continuous contraction to keep his eyes open. At this hour, motor neurons receive conflicting instructions. Ascending arousal system signals are weakened by the circadian system's sleep promotion. The levator muscle must work harder, experiencing structural failure under administrative duress. Muscle fibers are accumulating metabolic byproducts faster than they can be cleared, reducing force-generating capacity. Brother Aldrich feels his eyelids as heavy, as though small stones have been placed on them. Every few seconds, contractile force decreases and his eyelids begin to droop. He notices this and voluntarily increases motor neuron firing rate, but this accelerates metabolite accumulation. This creates a cycle of partial closure and voluntary correction. The eyelid droop is accompanied by uncoordinated, slow-rolling eye movements, characteristic of the transition to sleep. Brother Aldrich's eyes are moving in patterns more appropriate for sleep onset than visual attention. His brain's arousal systems are also experiencing structural failure. The locus coeruleus normally fires to maintain wakefulness, but at this circadian phase it is receiving inhibitory input that reduces its firing rate. This noticeably decreases arousal, making his thoughts slower and his attention less focused. Remaining awake requires continuous voluntary override of multiple physiological systems. It creates a sense of profound, existential fatigue. Brother Aldrich's monastic training allows him to tolerate this better than most, but his body still protests. This is the essential nature of monastic discipline: the willingness to impose administrative override on biological systems in service of spiritual practice. We must also audit the ongoing digestive processing of a bowl of barley pottage consumed 11 hours ago. That pottage has reached the colon, and we must audit the administrative complications introduced by stone grit. Stone ground grain inevitably incorporates minute stone fragments from millstones. These fragments are not removed before cooking. Brother Aldrich's pottage contained approximately 40 to 60 milligrams of stone particles, foreign material requiring processing and elimination. The grit's journey began with chewing, where harder quartz particles created microscopic abrasion on his molars. Over decades, this accumulates into noticeable tooth wear, exposing dentin. The grit passed through his esophagus with bureaucratic indifference and arrived in his stomach. The stomach's gastric mucosa is designed for harsh acidic conditions but not for abrasion from hard particles. Grit particles settle toward the stomach's dependent surface and are then displaced by gastric contractions. During these contractions, grit is dragged across the mucous surface, creating microscopic channels that temporarily expose underlying epithelial cells to harsh acid. This creates micro-lesions and localized inflammatory responses. The epithelial cells respond through rapid replacement. The gastric epithelium surface cells are completely replaced every 3 to 5 days. His stomach is conducting an ongoing damage and repair cycle, an administrative burden with a measurable metabolic cost. The grit particles eventually pass into the small intestine where the response is more benign because the environment is nearly neutral. By 3:28 a.m. the grit has reached the colon where it is being consolidated into fecal matter. These particles serve no function and impose only costs. They are traveling through the transverse colon at this moment. Brother Aldrich remains in the corridor. We have now consumed approximately 12,500 words of our audit. The tedium accumulates with satisfying density. The night persists. Brother Aldrich finally initiates movement. He engages the complex biomechanical systems required for locomotion. The first step begins with a weight shift forward and to the left. This requires coordinated activation of muscle groups like the left gluteus medius to stabilize his pelvis and the left quadriceps to prevent knee collapse. As his right foot unweights, pressure decreases from 610 newtons to near zero, allowing the leather sole to recover approximately 0.3 millimeters of its thickness. His sandal straps, 3 across the top, around the ankle, and between the toes, conduct a mechanical negotiation with his skin. As the foot lifts, the arch increases and metatarsal strap tension increases to approximately 12 newtons. This translates to a pressure of approximately 67 kilopascals, sufficient to compress skin and tissue. His mechanoreceptors detect this immediately and file the information as within acceptable parameters. As his right foot swings forward, the ankle strap must slide slightly as the joint rotates. This creates friction between leather and skin, a subtle, detectable burning sensation. The toe strap between his first and second toes presents the most complex negotiation. This strap must secure the front of the sandal in a location with high nerve density and thin skin. The strap creates a thin line of concentrated pressure that is continuously monitored by mechanoreceptors. Any prolonged pressure above 50 kilopascals could cause tissue damage. At this moment, the mechanical negotiation proceeds without incident. Brother Aldrich's right foot completes its forward swing and descends. The sandal sole contacts the stone heel first. Kinetic energy is dissipated through mechanisms including the radiation of acoustic energy into the air. This small energy conversion produces a clearly audible event. As the leather compresses against stone, both materials deform. The stone surface vibrates at its natural resonance frequencies, radiating high-frequency sound waves, 2000–8000 Hz, into the air. Simultaneously, the viscoelastic leather sole compresses, generating lower-frequency sound, 200–800 Hz. The combined acoustic output arrives at Brother Aldrich's ear as a sound pressure level of approximately 42 decibels SPL, noticeably above the corridor's 20 decibel baseline. Following the initial impact, Brother Aldrich's weight transfers fully onto his right foot. Different regions of the sole contact the stone sequentially, midfoot, then forefoot. Each contact generates additional acoustic pulses. Throughout this phase, the leather sole compresses from 6 to 5.4 millimeters. This compression generates continuous low-level sound as the leather's internal structure adjusts, barely distinguishable from the baseline silence. As his weight transfers forward for the next step, his right foot begins to unload. The compressed leather sole begins to recover its thickness, generating sound through the release of stored elastic energy, a soft creaking or groaning. As the foot lifts completely, the final acoustic event occurs, the separation of leather from stone. Temporary van der Waals bonds break, generating a final quiet sound that completes the acoustic cycle of the footfall. The second and third steps follow similar patterns. Brother Aldrich has now advanced approximately 2.4 meters and reached the scriptorium door. He pushes open the heavy oak door and steps across the threshold into a different atmospheric regime. The scriptorium's air possesses a distinct olfactory character dominated by iron gall ink, the standard medieval writing medium. This ink creates a complex chemical mixture with a distinctive and persistent odor. Aged ink releases volatile compounds, traces of oxidized ferrous ions, organic acids, and a metallic scent. Brother Aldrich's olfactory receptor neurons detect these molecules and signals synapses directly in the olfactory bulb, making olfaction the only sense with direct brain access. The smell triggers memory networks, priming his brain for scribal work. But iron compounds in the ink vapor can chronically irritate the nasal mucosa and create a metallic headache, a dull, persistent pressure sensation that Brother Aldrich has learned to ignore. The second major olfactory component is vellum, animal skin processed into writing substrate. Vellum releases trace ammonia from decomposing urea in the skin tissue. The smell of vellum is sanitized mortality, the smell of dead animal rendered into useful material. The combination of ink and vellum creates the scriptorium's characteristic olfactory signature. The air temperature in the scriptorium is approximately 4 degrees Celsius. This cold reduces olfactory intensity and sensitivity. Smells are subdued, requiring deep inhalation to fully appreciate the environment. Brother Aldrich moves to his assigned desk, an oak writing surface mounted at an angle. The desk represents a logistical disaster for the human spine. Oak is ideal for furniture but unforgiving as a working surface, providing no cushioning for elbows or wrists. The surface is slanted upward at approximately 20 degrees from horizontal. This intentional slant improves viewing angles but forces Brother Aldrich to adopt a specific spinal posture. He must lean forward, flexing his spine from its neutral standing curve. Sitting tends to flatten the lumbar lordosis, and rotation of the pelvis posteriorly creates a slouched posture. He resists this through conscious muscular effort, but the desk slant forces him to flex his thoracic and lumbar spine forward by 25 to 30 degrees. This flexion requires continuous activation of the erector spinae muscles to prevent forward collapse. They must generate approximately 45 to 50 newtons of tension, translating to compressive loading on lumbar intervertebral discs. Compressive loading increases from a standing 700 newtons to approximately 1,100 to 1,200 newtons, a 60 to 70% increase. The load shifts anteriorly, pushing the nucleus pulposus posteriorly against the posterior annulus fibrosus. Over hours of work, this annulus experiences continuous stress and fatigue. This creates a dull, persistent pressure sensation that accumulates over time. His mechanoreceptors report this elevated but tolerable stress to his nervous system. To keep his eyes directed at the writing surface, he must also extend his cervical spine, tilting his head backward. This configuration loads cervical facet joints and increases tension in posterior neck muscles. Suboccipital muscles fatigue quickly, and after 45 to 60 minutes, Brother Aldrich will experience a dull ache at the base of his skull, a tension headache. He has only just sat down. The stool supports his sit bones with minimal padding between bone and wood. He is positioned for work but has not yet begun. We have consumed approximately 16,000 words of our audit. The night continues, the cold persists, and documentation proceeds with thoroughness. Brother Aldrich reaches for his quill, a goose primary flight feather from the left wing. It rests in a tripod grip between thumb, index, and middle finger. The contact point between quill and middle finger bears the majority of grip pressure. Brother Aldrich's middle finger has developed a specialized callus, an adaptive thickening of the stratum corneum to approximately 400 micrometers, a 20-fold increase. This toughened zone protects underlying tissue from damage. The surface layer consists of tightly packed keratinocytes, but deeper layers show progressively less organization. The callus also exhibits cracks where it has exceeded its tensile strength during previous sessions. When the quill presses against this coil-used surface with 2.5 newtons of force, the pressure distribution is affected by this complex architecture. The quill shaft consists of a keratin wall surrounding a hollow core. Keratin's hierarchical structure gives the quill stiffness to resist bending and slight compliance to absorb grip pressure. Grip force produces a pressure of approximately 167 kilopascals, causing both quill and finger tissue to deform. The quill shaft deforms by 0.15 mm, while finger tissue deforms by approximately 0.8 mm. Friction between quill and finger keratin is essential for grip control. Brother Aldrich's motor control system has calibrated his grip force to provide exactly enough friction without causing rapid fatigue. This pressure distribution activates multiple classes of mechanoreceptors. Merkel cells respond to sustained pressure, and Meissner corpuscles respond to changes in pressure. Pacinian corpuscles deep in the dermis will activate during writing when the quill's movement creates vibrations. Sensory signals reach the somatosensory cortex, where the hand occupies roughly 30% of the entire representation, reflecting its importance for skilled control. His brain continuously monitors grip pressure, adjusting motor commands to maintain optimal force. This feedback control operates below conscious awareness. Brother Aldrich positions the quill nib to inscribe the first letter of today's work, I. The quill nib carries a reservoir of approximately 2.5 microliters of iron gall ink held by capillary action. He lowers the nib until it contacts the vellum. Contact occurs first at the nib's tip, a sharp edge perhaps 50 micrometers wide. Downward force distributed over this tiny area produces a pressure of 120 megapascals, substantial but below the yield strength of the vellum. The vellum retains microscopic irregularities, and the nib tip encounters this topography. Initial contact points begin the ink transfer immediately through direct wetting. Ink is primarily water with dissolved iron sulfate, tannic acid, and gum arabic. The vellum's collagen surface is extremely hydrophilic, and the ink spreads readily. As the nib moves in a downward stroke, ink continues flowing from the reservoir. Once deposited, the ink immediately begins penetrating the vellum's subsurface structure. Vellum consists of a dense mat of collagen fibers with substantial void space, nearly half the material's bulk. These void spaces draw liquid into the material through capillary action. Capillary pressure, roughly atmospheric pressure, drives the ink into the vellum structure without external force. The ink penetrates rapidly, wicking into the collagen network. But penetration is not uniform. The ink must navigate a three-dimensional maze of fibers, a capillary negotiation. Once inside the vellum, the ferrous iron oxidizes and complex with tannins to form insoluble iron tannate compounds. This chemical transformation serves as a fixation mechanism, ensuring the letter will persist for centuries. After approximately 15 to 20 seconds, capillary penetration has largely completed, reaching an equilibrium depth of approximately 80 to 120 micrometers. Now evaporation dominates. Water evaporates from the vellum surface and the upper regions of the penetrated zone. Under scriptorium conditions, complete drying will require approximately 90 to 120 seconds. Brother Aldrich will not touch the letter until adequate drying has occurred. As water evaporates, dissolved solids concentrate and precipitate. Gum arabic serves as a binder, holding pigment particles in place. The final state is a letter integrated with the animal skin substrate, permanent and durable. We have audited the first letter, a single vertical stroke. Brother Aldrich will produce approximately 2,400 such letters today. Each represents a similar complexity of biomechanics and chemistry. But we will not document all 2,400 tonight. The audit must conclude. Administrative protocols recognize that even thorough procedures must eventually close their ledgers. We have audited 48 minutes of Brother Aldrich's life at a rate that suggests lived reality contains vastly more detail than any documentation system can capture. Existence overwhelms documentation. Brother Aldrich is unaware of most of what we have documented. His consciousness occupies a thin executive layer atop vast unconscious operations. Close examination reveals the self to be an emergent property of countless mechanical processes. Wall habits, limestone floors, spinning ATP synthase molecules, and the call-used middle finger. Despite all documented inefficiencies and discomforts, Brother Aldrich continues inscribing letters at 3:58 a.m. in a cold scriptorium. This persistence represents biological success. he has not yet ceased. The tallow candle on his desk burns with poor efficiency, producing approximately 75 watts of radiant power. This flame gutters as air currents from his breathing disturb the combustion zone, causing his pupils to constrict and dilate in continuous adjustment. Shadows dance across his vellum, creating an atmospheric quality we have deliberately not audited because it falls outside our purview. We file our report and close the ledger. The audit is complete. Brother Aldrich continues his work, proceeding one clerical event at a time into the darkness of a November morning. The file is closed, and perhaps sleep finally arrives.